Good evening. I'm usually much more comfortable sitting behind a piano, but I have prepared a few remarks about my story. So good evening. I'm pleased and honored to be invited to speak tonight, and I am quite lucky to be here at all. After reading an extensive profile on me in the Sunday New York Times magazine, Dr. Sheesh invited me, very persuasively, to come here to tell you all the story of what happened to me in 2008. So here goes. I have had HIV/AIDS since the mid-1980s. I had been previously hospitalized a couple of times for elevated blood sugar, from antiretrovirals, and for a massive MRSA infection. In early January of 2008, I was admitted to St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City in an advanced state of AIDS-related dementia. The virus had simply attacked my brain. I was paranoid, delusional, and quite psychotic. I was in a semi-coma for about 10 days and was put on a high dose of Zyprexa. After my release, it took slightly over 2 months for me to come back to normal. Though I had lost weight in the process and was very weak, 2 new antiretroviral drugs, Celsentry and Icentris, reduced my viral load to undetectable for the first time since I began treatment with AZT in 1989. So from mid-March until early June, I had sort of this honeymoon period. I was eating, playing concerts, gaining weight. Everything was moving in a good direction. Around the 6th of June, though, I began to feel weak, and in the next couple of days, I started to spike high fevers. Unfortunately, my internist was on vacation, and the doctors covering for him were not aggressive enough. When I decided to take a bath on the afternoon of June 10th and found that I could not get out of the tub nor get dressed once I was out, my partner Scott and I headed immediately to the St. Vincent's emergency room. As soon as I checked in, a blood oxygen sensor was put on my finger. It read below 70. Within minutes, I was triaged and intubated. 4 doctors, 2 from the ICU and 2 specialists, were over me immediately. I had very low blood pressure and a weak pulse, and my kidneys had shut down. I was in septic shock. Scott was told the next 24 hours will be critical. A very aggressive pneumonia and sepsis were diagnosed, and I was put in a surgical ICU room since that was what was available. I stayed there until they moved me into the regular ICU a couple of days later. I was intubated on a respirator, hooked up to numerous IVs, and was put in a medically induced coma. Every day, Scott would come in the morning and speak with the doctors. They were very clear that I was in critical condition. He remembers one of the ICU doctors saying, "Good things happen very slowly in the ICU, but bad things happen very fast." I remained off my antiretroviral treatment for about 10 days. My blood pressure went up and down. I had fevers of unknown origin and was on broad-spectrum antibiotics, including Avelox and Zyvox. Dialysis began about the 4th day. According to Scott, the challenges were that when the specialists came in and out, he had to continually let them know what had been going on to date, because at that point my chart was confusing and overwhelming. There were occasional coordination problems. The ICU doctors rotated every 2 weeks, so Scott had to build alliances with the nurses and interface with the new doctors, but all of them were top-notch, and the doctors got up to speed very quickly. It took 2 to 3 weeks to stabilize me, at which point I developed another pneumococcal pneumonia, Klebsiella, more fevers of unknown origin, and blood pressure spikes that had everyone concerned about the possibility of a stroke. My hands and feet were particularly swollen, and Scott explained that I was a pianist and needed physical therapy for my hands. Every night he would check for sheet scars to see if I'd been moved enough during the night. After the 10th day, I was placed on Zyprexa to avoid potential psychosis again, was given a tracheotomy, was put on a feeding tube. Unfortunately, this remained long after my discharge. I was actually unable to eat or drink anything for 8 months, since the intubation had paralyzed my right vocal cord and I could not safely swallow. Only with rigorous swallow therapy and a medialization thyroplasty was I able to speak in November and eat in February of 2009. At the 6-week point, they started to wean me from the respirator, first starting with 15 minutes a day, then working up from there. I was on Ativan, methadone, Zyprexa, Klonopin. Unfortunately, the withdrawal from the methadone was not handled as well as it could have been. In early August, I started to wake up, and Scott had to keep telling the nurses not to inject me with Ativan every time I moved. He played music, turned on the television, tried to stimulate me. On August 4th, almost 2 months after my entry to the ICU, I awoke and recognized him, but I couldn't speak. I didn't have the strength or coordination to use a letterboard or to write. So we communicated by me squeezing his hand once for no and twice for yes. Later, they showed him that if he put his finger over my tracheotomy hole, I could speak in a whisper. The nurses in the ICU were amazing. They were well informed, they communicated well with the doctors even though they were overloaded at times. The doctors and nurses had mutual respect and they worked as a truly excellent team, and the doctor turnover process generally was very smooth. After a day or two, I was placed in a step-down unit, and there was a noticeable loss in the quality of the nursing in many areas: general knowledge, access to information, and perceived interest in the patients. I was very frightened, and I couldn't speak, so I couldn't get anyone's attention. I was there 4 to 5 days in absolute helpless and misery. The 2 days in a regular room before I went to an inpatient rehab center for about 1 month. Then I learned to walk again, did basic OT and PT, and began to speak in a hoarse whisper after my tracheotomy hole healed. After my release from the rehab center, I was very fortunate to find an extraordinary physical therapist and wonderful swallow therapist that helped me get myself back together. The key to my survival was that the triage was quick and that the ICU doctors were on hand immediately. I would not, excuse me, I would not have lasted another 12 hours, perhaps less. The ongoing challenge was in keeping all the specialists in the ICU informed on a day-to-day basis. Then in October, I had pneumonia again and began vomiting up and defecating blood. They had to replace 4 units of blood when I was admitted to the ICU. But this time, fortunately, I was not intubated, but was placed on a CPAP mask. And the hospital generously provided around-the-clock nurse's aid to be sure that I didn't pull my mask off. Fortunately, I was out of the hospital in 1 week this time around. At this point, I should tell you that at this moment, I'm in the midst of composing a large piece called My Coma Dreams. This comes from an interesting outcome of my 2-month coma experience. I do not normally remember my dreams, but as I came to, I remembered a series of nightmares and dreams that were incredibly detailed. Some of them, I'm convinced, were related to what I was going through in the ICU. For example, in one nightmare, I'm strapped into the back seat of a panel van, and indeed, I was strapped to my bed for periods of time in the ICU. Some dreams are lyrical, some are surreal, some are comical, including one about Polonius Monk, whose birthday is today. In collaboration with a wonderful librettist and director, I'm in the midst of musically weaving these scenarios into a full evening piece for 11 musicians, an actor, singer, and animation and multimedia that will hopefully place the audience in the world of my dreams. This piece will premiere in May of 2011. In sum, all of this is just one person's account of his fortunately positive experience with ICU medicine. I owe my life to the extraordinary ICU team at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York, now tragically closed after doing wonderful work for 160 years, and to my wonderful partner, Scott. The quality of coordinated care that I received has enabled me to speak with you today and to play a concert for you tonight. I sincerely hope you'll come and hear the music at 8:30. The amazing work that all of you do is so important to humankind, and it is an honor to be here with you, and I welcome the chance to share with you what I do. You have shared so much with me. I sincerely thank you.